by the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth. Thank you for making the time this morning. First of all, the Labour Party seems to have committed to what was originally, of course, a Tory pledge, this triple lock on pensions, the raising it by average wages by 2.5% or inflation, whichever is the highest. It came in, of course, under George Osborne. Is it really practically affordable looking forward to the future?
Yes, I think it is. I think the pension should rise in line with inflation for this next financial year, absolutely. That was a promise that Rishi Sunak made from the dispatch box just 6 months ago. He then apparently ran away from that promise, and now it may well be U-turning on it again. It is a hokey-cokey, as you accurately described it. Of course, we're also bringing a motion to the House of Commons today, and given that pensioners need certainty, I hope Conservative MPs can vote for our motion today and send a message that the House of Commons will stand up for the 13 million retirees across this country and support them through this cost of living crisis.
We've got an ageing population in this country. Birth rates are low, and on demographic trends, what we're going to see is a huge number of older people being funded by a smaller number of people who are in work. How on earth is it affordable to have a smaller number of people in the in-work bit of society funding a growing number of people in the out-of-work bit of society?
Well, I think it's important that the state pension maintains its value. Of course, the state pension is an alternative or a replacement for one's earnings when you can no longer earn because you're older. And many of today's workers are unlikely to have a final salary pension scheme. They're the much more generous schemes that perhaps our parents and grandparents were able to take advantage of. So they're more likely to need a good state pension when they retire as well. So I would argue that fair increases in the state pension today are good for today's pensioners, but they're also good for tomorrow's pensioners, because frankly, if it wasn't there, workers today would have to save more, would have to put aside more themselves in the defined contribution schemes. So it's actually good for today's workers as well to ensure that the state pension continues to maintain its value.
Of course, many people of my generation don't really believe that there's going to be a state pension of the same value by the time that we retire. Private pensions, of course, have come to the fore partly because of that. But if we look in the rounds now in terms of how things can be funded, £11 billion is a huge amount of money. That's going to have to come, as we've learnt in recent weeks, either through tax rises or through spending cuts. How would Labour fund this pledge?
Well, first of all, Tom, I want to make sure that you do have a decent pension when you retire, which I appreciate is probably a long time off, but I'm fighting for you as well to have a decent pension when you retire. Now, look, obviously, it doesn't really work like this in terms of how the Treasury fund this, but people have contributed to their state pension. My mum would say, I paid all my stamps for that pension. People have worked hard. Many people have worked hard in difficult jobs, which has left them with permanent disabilities and ill health. So people feel they've made a contribution to that pension. The second thing, though, is that this is only now a question mark because of the disastrous budget of 6 or 7 weeks ago, which led to that spike in borrowing costs, a run on pension funds, mortgage rates ricocheting around the money markets, and now the government are saying we need deep cuts as a consequence of decisions that they made only a few weeks ago. At the next general election, we'll come forward with our fully funded manifesto, because we've seen what happens when politicians are cavalier and reckless with the public finances. But I think for today that government ministers and Rishi Sunak should honour the promise that they made to pensioners actually in their manifesto, because that is the basis on which Rishi Sunak is arguing he doesn't need a general election because of that manifesto. They should honour that promise, and that's the motion that we're bringing to the House of Commons today.
It's interesting, however, that if we look at the gilt yields, the cost of borrowing for the government, it is now lower than it was before that mini-budget. Indeed, in terms of mortgage rates, they're lower than in the United States. And interest rates, of course, the base rate of the Bank of England, lower as well than in the United States. Is it really true that that this country is in an issue now compared to where it was before the mini-budget? I'm not so sure that that's true, but I think people will be raising an eyebrow in terms of seeing the Labour Party saying that we should spend this £11 billion without saying where the money's coming from.
Well, we're calling on the government to honour the promise that they made. It's a manifesto commitment for the Conservative Party, but it's a promise that Rishi Sunak made less than 6 months ago. And indeed, my opposite number, Mel Stride, who's now the Work and Pension Secretary, just over a month ago he was saying we should inflation-proof both universal credit and the basic state pension. So we're just holding them to their promise. And the issue about gilt yields, you're right to raise that, but of course, in the response to the Kwarteng trust budget of 6 or 7 weeks ago, gilt yields rose, that means gilt prices were dropping, and it led to a run on pension funds, and mortgage rates did ricochet, and there are families now who will need to remortgage this year who are facing an increase in their mortgage as a consequence of decisions by the Conservative government. Point that the market has changed since the immediate response to that budget, but people are still paying, or a significant number of people are looking at increased mortgages as a result of the decisions made by Conservative ministers at the time.
Now, I do want to finally touch upon a big issue that was raised at the weekend, and this, of course, is whether or not the UK should be paying climate reparations to countries around the world, countries which may indeed have their own space programmes or nuclear weapons. Now, your shadow cabinet colleague, Ed Miliband, suggested that the United Kingdom should be paying perhaps billions of pounds in climate reparations to other countries. Is that really the position of the Labour Party?
The Labour Party is that it's right that this is on the agenda at the COP27 meetings in Egypt. I think the government themselves have said it should be on the agenda and are prepared to look at this as well. But let's see what comes out of those discussions. This country does have a proud history of funding development aid and playing its role on the world stage on that front. But let's see what comes out of the discussions. And we are not saying that billions of pounds should go here or there, but we think it's right that it's discussed at the COP27 event.